The words left her mouth before courage could abandon her. "Please marry me." The iron cage shuddered in the wind. Dust swirled across the town square like a living thing, coating her knees, her skirt, the bars she gripped with both hands. Inside, the man didn't move. His arms hung shackled above his head, wrists raw and bleeding where metal met flesh. His chest rose and fell, slow and deliberate, but his eyes stayed fixed on some point beyond the horizon. The crowd erupted. Gasps turned to nervous laughter. A woman shrieked. Someone shouted that Janet Cohen had finally lost her mind. But the man in the cage said nothing. He had said nothing for 2 years. If he refused her now, the noose waited. If he accepted, she might not survive the week. Yet somehow his silence felt less like rejection and more like the last breath before a storm. Janet hadn't come to Red Hollow to propose to a condemned man. 5 days earlier, she'd arrived on the afternoon stage, her carpet bag tied with twine, her morning dress faded to gray. The letters in her pocket promised land, safety, a fresh start in a valley where respected men couldn't steal what was hers. The man who'd written them, a distant cousin, a lifeline, was supposed to meet her at the station. He never came. The clerk at the land office barely looked up when she asked. "Silas Cohen? Died 3 months back. Fever took half the camp." The floor tilted beneath her. And his claim? Reverted to the territory. He stamped a form without looking at her. "Next." Janet had walked out into the blazing afternoon heat with nowhere to go and $12 to her name. No husband, no home, no future. The same men who'd put a bullet in her first husband's back for his Ohio farmland were here too, wearing different faces, filing different papers, but hunting just the same. That was when she saw the cage. It stood in the center of the square like a monument to cruelty. 8 feet tall, forged from black iron, baking under a sun that showed no mercy. Inside it, chained with his arms stretched toward the sky, was the man they called Burton. They said he'd killed a rancher in the high country, said he lived like an animal in the mountains, said he'd stopped speaking after raiders murdered his family and the town had tried to hang him for defending himself, said it took 8 armed men to drag him down in irons. Janet saw none of that. She saw exhaustion carved into a human frame. She saw scars layered over scars. She saw a man the world had already buried. "How long has he been locked in there?" she asked the woman selling bread at the nearest stall. "Near a month. Judge comes next week." The woman's eyes gleamed with cruel anticipation. "Then they'll stretch his neck proper." The cage cast a long shadow across the dirt. Janet stood at its edge, studying the man inside. His dark hair hung in tangles past his shoulders, wild and matted. His beard hid most of his face, but she could see the shape of his jaw, the set of his mouth, the way his eyes stayed carefully empty. His bare torso was sun-bronzed and scarred, muscles knotted from labor, from survival, from fighting a world that wanted him dead. Heavy boots caked in red dust, shackles that had rubbed his wrists to bone. This was not the posture of a monster. It was the posture of a man who'd given up everything, including hope. "Don't get too close." Sheriff Hartman appeared at her elbow, hand on his pistol. "He's dangerous." "Has he hurt anyone while caged?" Janet asked. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Not yet." "Then he's shown more restraint than most free men I've known." Hartman's face darkened, but Janet had already turned away. She'd seen enough hangings, enough justice delivered by men who confused power with righteousness. Her husband was a respected man, too, until richer men decided otherwise. She reached into her bag and felt the small cloth bundle hidden at the bottom, the last possession of value she owned. A thin gold band, worn smooth by years on her finger, now wrapped in the scrap of her wedding dress. The weight of it steadied her. She walked back to the cage. The crowd had thinned, but curious eyes still watched from doorways and windows. She knelt in the dust, inches from the bars, close enough to touch. For the first time, the man inside moved. His head turned just slightly, and his eyes found hers. They were gray, storm-colored, deep. Not empty after all, just carefully guarded, alive with something she recognized instantly. The look of a person who lost everything and was still, somehow, standing. "I don't know what you did," she said softly, to him, "and I don't know if they're right about you, but I know what it means to be condemned by people who never asked for the truth." She unwrapped the ring. Gold caught the afternoon light. "My name is Janet Cohen. I'm a widow. I came here for land that doesn't exist and a future that died 3 months ago. I have $12, 1 bag, and this ring. That's all. But if you'll have me as your wife, I can get you out of this cage." The man stared at her. Something flickered behind his eyes, surprise maybe, or disbelief. His lips parted as though he might speak, then closed again. Janet held up the ring so the crowd could see. Her voice rose, clear and unwavering. "I'm invoking territorial marriage law. I claim this man as my husband under legal contract, freely witnessed." The square exploded. "She's mad. He'll murder her before sunset. Someone stop this." Sheriff Hartman pushed through the crowd, face flushed. "Mrs. Cohen, you don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." She stood, ring still raised. "This man has been held without trial for a month. I'm removing him from your custody as my lawful husband. Or would you prefer to explain to the circuit judge why you denied a widow her legal right to marry?" The silence that followed was razor sharp. Janet turned back to the cage. The man's eyes hadn't left her face. She knelt again, close enough to see the scars on his knuckles, the tremor in his bound hands. "I can't promise you safety," she whispered. "I can't promise you anything except that I won't cage you again. If you want to walk away when we're clear of this town, I won't stop you." She offered the ring through the bars. "But if you stay, we build something together, something they can't take from us." Seconds stretched. The crowd held its breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, the man in the cage nodded. One movement, certain, final. Janet's heart hammered against her ribs. She turned to the sheriff. "He's agreed. Unlock the cage." Before we begin, subscribe to Wild West Vengeance for relentless stories of revenge and justice.
The sheriff's keys rattled against the iron lock. Each click echoed across the square like a gunshot. Janet stood perfectly still, the gold ring clutched in her palm, while the crowd pressed closer, hungry for spectacle. "This is a mistake," Hartman muttered, yanking the cage door open. "And when he kills you, don't expect anyone to come running." Burton didn't move. His arms remained suspended above his head, shackled to the cage's roof, trembling from a month of bearing his own weight. His eyes stayed fixed on Janet, searching her face for something she couldn't name. The sheriff climbed inside with a second set of keys, unlocking the overhead chains. Burton's arms dropped like stones. He staggered, caught himself against the bars, breath coming in sharp gasps. His wrists were raw meat, bone visible through torn skin. Janet flinched, but didn't look away. Hartman emerged, leaving Burton's ankle shackles intact. "He stays chained until you're out of my jurisdiction, and you're signing a release." He thrust a paper at Janet. "States that whatever happens to you is your own doing." She signed without reading it. The preacher was fetched from the church, a thin man with nervous hands who kept glancing at Burton as though expecting him to lunge. The ceremony took less than 3 minutes. Janet slipped the ring onto Burton's scarred finger. It barely fit over his knuckle, a fragile circle of gold against calloused skin. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher stammered, then fled. Burton stared at the ring. His lips moved, forming words that never came. Janet picked up her carpet bag. "Can you walk?" He nodded once, then shuffled forward. The leg irons clanked with each step, short chains forcing him into a halting gait. The crowd parted like water, faces twisted with disgust, fascination, pity. A woman spat at Janet's feet. A man called her a fool. Children stared wide-eyed from behind their mother's skirts. Janet walked beside Burton, matching his pace, her head held high. She didn't look back. Not when they passed the saloon where men laughed and placed bets on how long she'd last. Not when they left the last building behind and the dirt road turned to scrubland. Not when Red Hollow disappeared into the heat shimmer and they were finally, terribly, alone. They walked for hours. The sun crawled across the sky, merciless and white. Burton's breathing grew labored, sweat soaking through his hair, his bare chest glistening. He never complained, never slowed, just kept moving forward with mechanical determination. Janet's own feet blistered inside her boots. Her water canteen ran dry by mid-afternoon. Still they walked, following the road north toward the mountains that rose like broken teeth against the horizon. By evening, they reached a stand of junipers clinging to a rocky hillside. Janet stopped, her legs shaking. "We'll camp here." Burton sank to the ground immediately, his back against a twisted trunk. His eyes closed. For a moment, Janet thought he might have passed out, but his chest still rose and fell, steady despite everything. She set down her bag and looked around. No water nearby, no supplies except what she carried, no plan beyond getting as far from Red Hollow as possible. "I'll gather wood," she said, more to herself than to him. She returned with an armful of dried juniper branches and a few pieces of sage, arranging them in a rough pile. Her hands trembled as she struck her flint. Once, twice. The sparks died in the dirt. On the fifth try, she managed a small ember that guttered out before catching. Burton's hand appeared in her peripheral vision. She froze. Burton gestured toward the wood, then to himself. His eyes asked permission. Janet moved aside. Burton arranged the branches with careful precision, building a structure she didn't understand at first. A small teepee of kindling with a hollow center, surrounded by larger pieces angled just so. He took her flint, struck it once, and caught the spark in a nest of shredded juniper bark. He breathed on it, gentle and controlled, nursing the ember until it bloomed into flame. Within minutes, a fire crackled between them, bright and warm against the gathering darkness. Janet stared at him. "You've done that before." He nodded, then pointed to her bag. The carpet bag had torn along one seam during the walk, contents threatening to spill. Burton gestured for it. She handed it over, uncertain. From somewhere in his tattered trousers, he produced a bent nail. He worked the nail through the fabric with surprising dexterity, weaving it in and out, creating a crude but effective stitch. His hands moved with muscle memory, quick and sure. When he finished, he returned the bag to her, the tear sealed. "Thank you," Janet whispered. Burton met her eyes for a moment, then looked away. In the firelight, she could see him more clearly, the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, the scars that told stories he couldn't speak, the way his shoulders curved inward as though still expecting a blow. This was not a beast. This was a man who'd been broken and was still, somehow, trying to hold the pieces together. They shared the last of her dried beef in silence. Burton ate slowly, deliberately, like someone who'd forgotten what regular meals felt like. When full dark settled over the hillside, he added more wood to the fire, then positioned himself on the opposite side, as far from Janet as the camp allowed. She understood. He was giving her space, showing her he wasn't a threat. Janet wrapped her shawl and lay down on the hard ground, using her bag as a pillow. Across the fire, Burton sat with his back against the juniper, eyes open, watching the darkness beyond our small circle of light. The shackles on his ankles gleamed dull red in the firelight. She fell asleep to the sound of iron gently rattling as he shifted position, standing guard over the woman who'd freed him.
Morning came cold and bright. Janet woke to find Burton already awake, the fire rebuilt, her canteen filled with water he must have found somewhere in the pre-dawn hours. He sat by a flat rock, holding his leg irons, studying them with intense focus. He looked at Janet, then at the shackles, then at a large stone half buried in the dirt nearby. His meaning was clear. "Do it," she said. Burton dragged the stone free with effort, his arms still weak from captivity.
He positioned one shackle against its surface, then raised the other leg high. He brought his foot down hard, smashing the chain link against the rock. The clang echoed across the hills, once, twice, 10 times, 20. Sweat poured down his face, his jaw clenched with effort. The chain held. He kept going, each strike harder than the last, each impact sending vibrations through his whole body. His wrists started bleeding again from the strain, old wounds reopening. On the 37th strike, the chain shattered. Burton stood there, breathing hard, staring at the broken metal around his ankles. The bands remained locked to his legs, but the chain between them was gone. He could walk freely now. He could run if he wanted. He looked at Janet, then down at the broken shackles, then back at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Rage, relief, grief, she couldn't tell. Maybe all three at once. Then he knelt, picked up a piece of the broken chain, and hurled it as hard as he could into the wilderness. The metal sailed through the air and disappeared into a ravine. Burton's shoulders shook. His head bowed. A sound came from his throat, something between a sob and a roar, raw and wordless. Janet didn't move. She let him have this moment, this private exorcism of a month in a cage, 2 years of silence, a lifetime of being hunted. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet, but his jaw was set. He pointed north toward the mountains. "You know where we're going," Janet said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. They walked for 2 more days, climbing higher into the foothills. The landscape changed from scrubland to pine forest, the air growing thinner and colder. Burton moved differently now, no longer shuffling, but striding, his gait smooth despite the iron bands still locked around his ankles. He found water, identified edible plants, built fires each night with the same quiet competence. Janet watched him come alive in the wilderness. This was his element, his home. Whatever horrors Red Hollow had projected onto him vanished here, replaced by a man who knew every trail, every stream, every shelter the mountains offered. On the 3rd morning, they crested a ridge and Burton stopped. Below them spread a narrow valley, green and sheltered, a creek running through its center. And there, near the water, stood the remains of a structure, a dugout carved into the hillside, its roof collapsed, walls crumbling. Burton went rigid. His breathing changed, became shallow and quick. "What is this place?" asked Janet, though she already knew the answer from the way his whole body had turned to stone. He started down the slope, moving faster, then running. Janet followed, half sliding through loose shale and pine needles. By the time she reached the valley floor, Burton had collapsed in front of the ruined dugout, his hands pressed flat against the earth. His shoulders heaved. No sound came out, but his whole body shook with silent sobs. Janet approached slowly. She could see it now, the careful placement of the dugout for maximum shelter, the remains of a garden plot, a child-sized shoe half buried in the dirt near what had once been a doorway. This wasn't random. This was where he'd built his first home, where his family had lived, where raiders had come and taken everything, where the man called Josiah had died, leaving only Burton behind. She sat down beside him, not touching, just present. "We don't have to stay here," she said quietly. "We can find another valley." Burton shook his head violently. He pressed his palms harder against the ground, fingers digging into the soil. When he finally looked at her, his eyes held something fierce and desperate. He pointed at the ruins, then at her, then swept his arm across the whole valley. "This. Here. Build." "You want to rebuild here? Where it happened?" He nodded, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles jump. Janet looked at the collapsed dugout, at the valley that had witnessed so much loss. She understood. This wasn't just about shelter. This was about reclaiming ground that had been stolen from him, about refusing to let fear and grief have the final word. "All right," she said, "then we build."
The work began the next morning. Burton surveyed the valley with a craftsman's eye, walking the perimeter, testing soil, examining trees. He finally chose a spot 50 yards from the old dugout, close enough to honor the past, far enough to start fresh. He pointed at a stand of straight pines upslope, then mimed chopping. Janet fetched the small hatchet from her bag, the only tool they had. Burton took it, weighed it in his hand, then started climbing toward the trees. For 3 days he felled timber, not randomly, but with careful selection, taking only what the forest could spare, choosing trees that would yield the straightest beams. Janet hauled water, gathered stones for a foundation, cleared brush from their building site. On the 4th day, Burton began teaching her. He showed her how to strip bark, how to notch logs so they'd lock together, how to judge weight and balance. His hands moved constantly, demonstrating, correcting, guiding. He couldn't speak, but his meaning was always clear. Precise gestures, patient repetition, the occasional nod when she got it right. Janet learned he'd been a builder, a good one. His hands knew exactly how to brace a beam, where to place supports, how to create something that would stand against wind and weather. He moved around the timber with confidence, his body remembering skills his voice couldn't name. By the end of the 1st week, they had a foundation. By the end of the 2nd, walls were rising. Burton showed Janet how to mix mud and grass for chinking, how to overlap logs for a watertight seal. They worked from dawn until dusk, their hands blistering, then callousing, then becoming as tough as the wood they shaped. One evening, as the sun painted the valley gold, Janet stood back to look at what they'd built. The cabin was taking shape, small but solid, each log fitted with precision, each corner true. Smoke from their cooking fire drifted up through the valley, domestic and peaceful. Burton stood beside her, examining a beam he'd just set. He ran his hand along its length, checking for flaws, then nodded to himself. When he noticed Janet watching, he looked at her, then at the cabin, then back at her. The question in his eyes was simple. "Good?" "It's beautiful," she said. "You're a master craftsman." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. Pride, maybe, or just the quiet satisfaction of remembering who he'd been before the world tried to destroy him. He pointed at her, then at the beam she'd helped lift into place that morning. "You too." Janet felt tears prick her eyes. For the first time since leaving Red Hollow, she felt something other than desperation. She felt useful. She felt like she was building toward a future instead of running from the past. They stood together in the fading light, 2 outcasts in a mountain valley, covered in sawdust and dirt, their hands bleeding, their backs aching, surrounded by the bones of a home they were willing into existence through sheer stubborn will. It wasn't much yet, but it was theirs, and no one could take it away without a fight. The wagon appeared in early autumn, listing badly on the trail that skirted their valley. Janet spotted it first while hauling water from the creek. A canvas-topped freight wagon, one wheel canted at a dangerous angle, a tired horse standing in the traces. An old man sat on the ground beside it, head in his hands. She called for Burton. He emerged from the half-finished cabin, saw the wagon, and went still. People meant danger. People meant questions they couldn't answer. "He needs help," she said quietly. Burton's jaw worked. Then he nodded and started down the trail. The peddler looked up as they approached, eyes widening at the sight of Burton, still shirtless despite the cooling weather, still wearing the iron bands around his ankles, still wild-haired and silent. The old man scrambled backward. "Please," she said quickly, "we mean no harm. Your wagon's broken." "I can see that," the peddler wheezed. "Axle cracked 2 miles back. Been trying to limp it to Cedar Falls, but—" He gestured helplessly at the ruined wheel. Burton circled the wagon, examining it with the same focused intensity he brought to timber. He dropped to his knees, peering underneath, then stood and pointed at the peddler's cargo.
He needs to see what you're carrying, to fix it properly, she translated.
To fix it properly. The peddler hesitated, then pulled back the canvas. Tools, dozens of them, saws, planes, hammers, chisels, all jumbled together from the rough journey. Burton's eyes lit up. He pointed at a hand drill, then at the axle, miming the repair. "You can fix it?" the peddler asked. Burton nodded. He selected tools carefully, testing their weight and balance, then set to work. Janet watched him transform. This wasn't just survival craft, this was artistry. He measured by eye, cut with precision, fitted pieces together like they'd been born that way. Within 2 hours, he'd reinforced the axle with a splint of green wood, reset the wheel, and had the wagon standing true. The peddler stared in disbelief. That's masterwork. Where'd you learn to build like that?" Burton's expression shuddered. He turned away. "What do we owe you?" the peddler asked Janet, reaching for his coin purse. "Nothing," Janet said. "Just help when you found it." "No," the old man shook his head firmly. "A man does work like that, he gets paid proper." He walked to the back of the wagon and returned leading a mule, sturdy and sure-footed. "Her name's Sadie. She's worth 10 times what I could pay in coin for that repair. You take her." Burton's eyes widened. He looked at Janet, uncertain. "We can't," Janet started. "You can and you will," the old man interrupted. "I got 2 more mules and a long life of watching people. I know quality when I see it. That man's got a gift, and gifts like that deserve respect." He handed Janet the lead rope. "You folks building up in that valley?" "Yes," Janet said carefully. "Good land, hard land, but good." The peddler climbed onto his wagon, then paused. "There's talk in the towns about a widow who married the caged man from Red Hollow. Is that you?" Janet's spine stiffened. "It is." The peddler studied Burton, who stood motionless, waiting for judgment. "They said he was a monster, but I never met a monster who could build like that. You take care of each other." He clucked to his horse and rolled away, leaving them standing in the trail with a mule and the first kindness anyone had shown them since Red Hollow. Burton placed his hand on Sadie's neck. The mule snuffled his shoulder, completely unafraid. He looked at Janet, and for the first time she saw something close to hope in his eyes. They needed supplies before winter. The cabin was nearly finished, but they had no stores, no seed for spring, nothing but what they could hunt and gather. Cedar Falls was the closest town, a mining settlement 2 days' walk north. Janet had been dreading it, but the peddler's kindness had given her a fragile thread of courage. They packed light and left at dawn, Sadie carrying their small amount of trade goods, furs Burton had trapped, a few pieces of furniture he'd crafted from scrap wood. The town emerged from the pine forest like a wound, all mud and raw timber and the constant thunder of the stamp mill. Eyes followed them down the main street. Burton kept his head down, but Janet walked steady, leading Sadie toward the general store. They'd almost made it when a man stepped into their path. "You," he said, staring at Burton. "You're him, the one who killed my brother." The street went quiet. Men emerged from doorways, hands moved toward weapons. Burton went very still. His eyes met the young man's, and Janet saw recognition there, and guilt. "Luke Brenner was my brother," the man said, voice shaking. "They said you murdered him, stood over his body with blood on your hands." "Please," Janet said, "we don't want trouble." "Don't want trouble," the man laughed bitterly. "He took my brother from me, only family I had left, and he can't even speak, can he? Can't even tell me why." Burton's hands trembled. He looked around, desperate, then his eyes landed on Sadie's pack. Slowly, carefully, he reached inside and pulled out a small wooden horse he'd carved for trade. It was beautiful, delicate legs, flowing mane, every detail perfect. He held it out to Luke's brother. The young man stared at it, confused. "What is this?" Burton pointed at the horse, then at the man, then at himself. His hands moved in gestures Janet was learning to read. Brother, child, lost. "I don't understand," the man said, but his voice had lost its edge.
Burton knelt in the mud. He set the wooden horse down, then picked up a stick. In the dirt, he drew simple figures: a man, a woman, two small children, a house. Then he drew X's through the woman and children. He pointed at himself, then at the grieving figures. His hands shook as he signed again. Same loss. The brother's face crumpled. Raiders? You lost your family to raiders? Burton nodded. A sound came from his throat, small and broken.
And my brother? Burton picked up the stick again. He drew two figures fighting, drew one falling. Then he drew himself, standing over the body, and crossed out his own figure too. He pointed at the image, then at his chest. That man died too. Self-defense, Janet said quietly. Your brother attacked him. Burton had already lost everything. He was just trying to survive. The young man stared at the drawing, tears running down his face. They told me he was a monster. They said he killed Luke for sport. Burton shook his head. He picked up the wooden horse and pressed it into the man's hands, closing his fingers around it gently. His eyes held an apology words could never carry. Luke's brother stood there, the toy horse clutched to his chest, his whole body shaking. Finally, he stepped aside. Go, he whispered. Just go. They bought their supplies in heavy silence, the townspeople watching but no longer hostile. Word of what happened had spread. As they left Cedar Falls, Janet looked back to see Luke's brother still standing in the street, the wooden horse in his hands, staring at something only he could see. Winter came hard and fast. They finished the cabin just before the first snow, sealing the roof with sod, banking the walls with earth. Inside, Burton built a stone fireplace that drew perfectly, furniture that fit their small space like it had grown there, shelves and pegs, and all the small touches that turned shelter into home. Janet had never lived anywhere so quiet, so safe. The snow piled high outside, but inside they were warm, dry, together. Burton cooked better than she did, wild game stewed with herbs he'd foraged, bread baked in the coals. He still didn't speak, but he hummed sometimes while he worked, a low, tuneless sound that felt like contentment. The storm hit in January, a screaming white hell that lasted 3 days. On the second night, someone pounded on their door. Burton opened it to find a man half frozen, a woman slumped against him, heavily pregnant and gasping. Please, the man begged. We were trying to reach Cedar Falls. The baby's coming. Please. They pulled the couple inside. The woman, Sarah, was already in hard labor, her water broken, contractions coming fast. Janet had never delivered a baby. She looked at Burton in panic. He met her eyes, took a breath, then nodded. He'd done this before. Burton moved with calm efficiency, boiling water, laying out clean cloth, positioning Sarah by the fire. He guided Janet's hands, showing her how to support the woman, when to push, when to wait. The cabin filled with Sarah's cries, her husband's prayers, the roar of wind against the walls. The baby came near midnight, tiny and furious, filling the cabin with her wails. Burton caught her, cleared her airway, wrapped her in the softest cloth they had. He placed her in Sarah's arms, and the exhausted mother wept. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you. What's your name? I want to name her after you, after both of you." Burton froze. Janet saw his whole body go rigid. "His name is Burton," Janet said quickly. "No." The word was barely a whisper, rough and broken, but unmistakably spoken. Burton's first word in 2 years. Everyone stared at him. He looked at the baby, then at Janet, then at the child again. His eyes were wet. "Josiah," he said, the word scraping out of his damaged throat. "Was Josiah before they died, before I died." He touched the baby's tiny hand. This is life, new life. Josiah is buried with them in the valley. Burton is who I am now." Janet's hand found his. Burton, then, the man who saved this child, the man who builds instead of destroys. He looked at her, tears streaming into his beard. "The man you gave a future to."
His voice was ruined, scarred like the rest of him, but it was his. After 2 years of silence, he'd found it again in the presence of new life, in the reminder that grief didn't have to be the end of the story. The family left when the storm broke, the baby nursing strong, promises to tell everyone in Cedar Falls who'd saved them. Burton and Janet stood in the doorway watching them go, his hand still clasping hers. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not letting me hang." "Thank you," Janet replied, "for not letting me starve." They were rebuilding the garden plot when the riders came in spring, 3 men in city clothes, led by a local guide, carrying leather satchels and surveyor's tools. They tied their horses at the property line and walked onto the land like they owned it. "Are you Janet Cohen?" the tallest one asked.
I am. I'm Harold Grimshaw, representing Eastern Development Interests. We've filed a claim on this valley. You'll need to vacate within 30 days. The world tilted. This is our land. We've been here nearly a year. We've improved it, built on it. You have no deed, Grimshaw interrupted. The territory reverted this land to public domain. We've filed properly with the territorial office. The law is clear. Burton appeared from the cabin, hammer in hand. His eyes went flat and dangerous when he saw the men on their property. "Is that the outlaw?" one of the other men asked nervously. "The one who—" "Burton," Janet said sharply, "these men were just leaving." "We're not leaving," Grimshaw said, "and neither are you, not for 30 days. Then you're out, with or without your cooperation." He smiled coldly. "We're willing to purchase your improvements, $50 for the cabin. Take it or leave it." "A year of our lives," Janet said, voice shaking with fury. "Blood and blisters, and almost dying in winter storms. You think that's worth $50? I think it's worth whatever we say it's worth. That's how the law works, Mrs. Cohen. Men with money and papers win. People like you lose." Grimshaw tipped his hat mockingly. 30 days. Don't make this difficult." They rode away. Janet stood trembling, watching them disappear into the trees. Burton put his hand on her shoulder. "We're not leaving," she said. "No," he agreed. His voice was still rough, still quiet, but certain. "We fight." They rode to Cedar Falls the next day, to the office of the only lawyer in town. Martin Thatcher was old, half-deaf, and notoriously ornery. He listened to their story, examined the claim papers Grimshaw had filed, then leaned back in his chair. "They're using a loophole. The land wasn't officially registered when you settled it, but there's precedent for squatters' rights if you can prove continuous occupation and improvement. Problem is, that requires testimony, in a court, in front of a judge." Burton's face went white. "No, can't. The cage, Red Hollow." "He was never tried, never convicted. They held him illegally." "Maybe. But you'll have to prove that too, and you'll have to do it while convincing a judge that this land is rightfully yours." Thatcher looked at Burton. "Can you speak? Can you testify to what you've built here, what you've done to improve the land?" Burton's hands clenched. Fear and determination warred in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, for this, for her, yes." The courtroom in Cedar Falls was packed. Word had spread. The caged man from Red Hollow was coming to testify. People wanted to see the monster. Grimshaw sat with 2 expensive lawyers, confident and smug. Sheriff Hartman stood in the back, hand on his gun, ready to make his arrest. Burton walked in wearing clean clothes Janet had mended, his hair trimmed, his beard neat. He still wore the iron bands around his ankles. They'd never found a way to remove them. They marked every step he took with a quiet clink. The judge, a tired-looking man named Horace Perry, surveyed the room. "This is a property dispute, not a murder trial. Sheriff Hartman, you'll have your chance after we've settled the land claim. Until then, sit down and be quiet."
Hartman's jaw tightened, but he sat. Grimshaw's lawyers presented first. Deeds, surveys, proper paperwork, everything legal and clean. Then it was Burton's turn. He stood slowly, walked to the witness stand, and placed his scarred hand on the Bible. His voice, when he spoke, was rough but clear. "My name is Burton. Used to be Josiah, but that man died when raiders killed my family. I was caged for defending myself from the brother of one of those raiders. I was silent because words couldn't bring back what I lost." Then he looked at Janet. "Then this woman married me to save my life. She gave me a reason to speak again, to build again, to live again." The courtroom was dead silent. "We found that valley empty and broken. I rebuilt it because it was my first home, where my family died. I rebuilt it because I needed to prove that good things could grow in ground soaked with grief. We cleared timber, built a cabin that will stand 100 years, planted gardens, helped a family birth a child during a winter storm. That land is alive because we poured our lives into it." His voice strengthened. "And I won't let men with paper and money steal it because they think the law only protects people like them." He met the judge's eyes. "I've been caged. I've been called a monster, but I'm a builder, a craftsman, a husband, and I'm asking you to see that, to see us, and to give us the right to keep what we've earned." The judge was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at Grimshaw. "How long have you owned this claim?"
"We filed 6 weeks ago, Your Honor."
"And how long have the defendants occupied the land?"
"Approximately 11 months, but without proper
paperwork. Yes, I heard you the first time." Perry turned to the courtroom. "Is there anyone here who can verify the defendants' improvements to the property?" The peddler stood up. "I can, Your Honor. Man fixed my wagon like a master craftsman. Gave me back my livelihood. I seen their cabin. It's quality work." Luke's brother stood next. "He gave me kindness when I wanted his blood. He showed me grief isn't solved with more death. He's no monster." One by one, people from Cedar Falls stood. The family whose baby Burton delivered, the shopkeeper who'd sold them supplies, a trapper who'd sheltered in their cabin during a storm. Each one testified to Burton's character, to the work they'd done, to the life they'd built. Judge Perry banged his gavel. "I find in favor of the defendants. Squatters' rights are granted based on continuous occupation and substantial improvement. The claim filed by Eastern Development Interests is void. The land belongs to Burton and Janet Cohen." He looked at Burton. "Get yourself a proper deed filed. And Mr. Grimshaw, next time check if land is actually empty before you try to steal it." The courtroom erupted in applause. Grimshaw and his lawyers stormed out. Sheriff Hartman approached slowly, uncertain. "The murder charge?" he asked Judge Perry. "Was there ever a trial, Sheriff?" "No, but then there's no conviction. And from what I've heard today, there probably shouldn't be. Go find some actual criminals to arrest." Judge Perry stood, looked at Burton and Janet, and smiled. "Congratulations. You've earned this." They walked out of the courthouse into bright spring sunshine, the deed to their land clutched in Janet's hand. Burton stopped on the steps, lifted his face to the sky, and breathed deep. "Free," he said quietly. "Free," Janet agreed. They rode back to the valley slowly, Sadie plodding along under them both, the mountains green and welcoming. When they crested the ridge and looked down at their cabin, smoke curling from the chimney they'd built together, garden plots waiting for seed, Burton pulled Sadie to a stop. He turned to Janet. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else would." "Thank you," she said, "for being worth seeing." His hand moved to her stomach, resting there gently. She'd told him just that morning before court that they were going to have a child. Another life to fill the valley, another chance for joy to grow in grief-soaked ground. They sat together looking at the home they'd built from nothing, two outcasts who'd found each other in a cage and built a future, one log, one day, one act of stubborn hope at a time. The valley waited below, green and alive and theirs, forever theirs. And in the quiet of that moment, Burton smiled.